I want to get to a subject that I will openly admit is going to be highly sensitive. Some people are going to try to politicize it. It's not about politics to me. It's a sports story. But I don't give a damn how you feel. I'm not running from it. And that involves the WNBA coach. Her name is Cheryl Reeve. She's a coach in the WNBA. She is the coach of the Minnesota Lynx. And during this weekend, in a game against the Indiana Fever, she was seen wearing a Trans Kid Belong t-shirt.
That is the moment Stephen A. Smith decided he was not going to tiptoe around the WNBA's newest firestorm. And whether you agree with him or not, this is the part that made the story explode. He did not frame it as politics. He framed it as the league stepping directly into a battle it cannot afford to mishandle.
Indiana Fever player Sophie Cunningham. If you remember, this came after Sophie Cunningham defended her past statements on protecting girls from playing sports with transgender athletes. During an ESPN interview, Cunningham denied reports that she hates transgender people but wants to protect girls. If you remember, her quote was, "I think that I am here to extend love, but I also think with that love is truth, being honest. And I want to protect young girls in the locker room or young girls in sport who shouldn't have to go against biological men."
Now notice the setup. This did not come out of nowhere. Cheryl Reeve wears the shirt during a Minnesota Lynx game against the Indiana Fever, right after Sophie Cunningham had already made national headlines for saying she wanted to protect girls in sports and locker rooms. That timing matters. Because if this had happened in a random game nobody was watching, maybe it gets a few posts, maybe it fades by Monday morning. But this was a Fever game. That means Caitlin Clark cameras. That means national attention. That means people who do not usually watch the WNBA were suddenly watching the WNBA. And that is where Stephen A. starts building the case. Not just about the message on the shirt, about the choice to make that message in that exact spotlight. But the part that should actually bother the league comes later, because Stephen A. eventually takes it from culture war to business survival. And that is where this gets bigger than one coach, one shirt, or one player's quote.
On several occasions in the past, I've interviewed somebody by the name of Riley Gaines, who's a longtime advocate for biological men staying out of women's sports. Let me state for the record, I've interviewed Riley Gaines on at least 2 occasions.
Riley Gaines was the Kentucky swimmer in the NC2A that had to compete against William Leah Thomas, who was ranked basically 500th in the country in women's swimming. And he decided to switch over and say, "Oh, I'm a woman. I identify as a woman," for the University of Pennsylvania, and went on to literally smash the swimming records. Women's records. Just that quick. And of course, now she's an outspoken advocate for biological men staying the hell out of women's sports.
This is where he brings Riley Gaines into it. And whether people like that or not, this is the comparison that has driven the whole argument nationally. Gaines competed in NCAA swimming, became one of the loudest voices against biological males competing in women's sports, and Stephen A. is using her as the example of somebody who says this issue is not about hatred, it is about fairness. That is the line he keeps trying to draw. He is not saying trans people should be mistreated. He is saying that when the issue becomes athletic competition, physical advantage, and women's spaces, the conversation changes. And this is exactly why the WNBA is in such a dangerous position. Because the league has players, coaches, fans, media members, and sponsors all watching the same moment through completely different lenses. Some people saw Cheryl Reeve's shirt and thought it was a message of inclusion. Other people saw it and thought it was a direct response to Sophie Cunningham, a public rebuke and a political statement planted right in the middle of a game that had maximum visibility. That divide is what Stephen A. is attacking. He is saying the WNBA cannot pretend this is just a harmless personal expression when the league's biggest draw is in the building and the national conversation is already hot.
And the thing that shocks me is this is not a conversation about being anti-anything. This is a conversation about being pro-girls. Ladies and gentlemen, at some point in time, there has to be the return of common sense.
Oh,
This is not about preaching hate. Nobody is supporting that on this show. Nobody should be supporting that in our society. I am a live and let live kind of guy. I'm concerned.
the return of common sense. Could it?
That sentence is the center of the whole rant. This is not about being anti-anything. This is about being pro-girls. And that framing is important because it is the same framing Sophie Cunningham has been using. She said she wanted to extend love, but she also wanted to tell the truth as she sees it. That is why her comments hit so hard. She did not present herself as angry. She presented herself as protective. That makes the WNBA's response harder. If the league or its loudest voices paint every person on that side as hateful, they risk confirming what a lot of new viewers already suspect, that the WNBA does not know how to talk to half the country. And that is the trap. The WNBA is not the NBA. It does not have endless margin for error. It is still trying to grow, still trying to hold casual viewers, still trying to convert curiosity into loyalty. So when a coach decides to become part of the controversy, instead of letting the game be the product, the question becomes very simple. Was that leadership or was that brand damage?
This is not about looking at people who are trans and hating on them or wanting denied their civil rights and civil liberties. That's not what this is about. If you're an adult and those are the decisions that you want to make with your life, I support your right to make those decisions.
By the way, every rally that has taken place in support of Sophie Cunningham's message has been a pro-girl, pro-women's rally. They've been very vocal about the fact that they are not an anti-trans rally.
This is the part where Stephen A. tries to separate personal rights from athletic eligibility. He is saying if an adult wants to live their life a certain way, that is their right. But he draws the line when the decision affects female athletes competing in women's sports. And the reason this matters for this particular WNBA fight is because Sophie Cunningham's supporters have been saying the same thing at those rallies. They have described the message as pro-girl and pro-woman, not anti-trans. Now, critics would say that does not erase the harm they believe the message causes. Supporters would say the media keeps flattening the argument into hate because that is easier than debating fairness. That is the collision. And once Cheryl Reeve put on that shirt, she did not just express support for one group of kids. She placed herself directly across from the message Cunningham's supporters were trying to make. That is why Stephen A. is furious. He thinks Reeve used a WNBA platform to escalate a fight the league should have been trying to calm down.
Where you lose me is in two places. Okay? Number one, when you're talking about all your private parts remaining what they are as men and thinking that you get to use girls' bathrooms. I'm not down for that. Number two, when you're trying to compete against women, against girls in women's sports, trying to act like there's no advantage when there's no way in hell that there's no advantage. This is not about being anti-anything. This is about being pro-girls, pro-females, pro-women, pro-ladies.
That is Stephen A. drawing the two lines he says he will not cross: private spaces and women's sports. He is not softening it, and he is not hiding behind corporate language. And that is why this clip moved, because people expect ESPN personalities to get careful around this topic. They expect a lot of qualifiers, a lot of distancing, a lot of there are complicated conversations to be had. Stephen A. did not do that here. He went straight at it. For the WNBA, that is a problem, because the story now has a national media figure giving permission for more mainstream criticism. This is not just a podcast host on the edge of the internet. This is Stephen A. Smith saying, out loud, that Cheryl Reeve made an irresponsible choice. And when somebody with his platform says that, it shifts the conversation. People who were already mad feel validated. People who were unsure suddenly hear the issue framed as common sense. And the league has to decide whether it wants to keep letting coaches and players define the controversy for them, because silence is also a decision. And right now, silence leaves the loudest people in control.
In sport that have sold out women in this. Right up the river. Nah, we're good. Bring whatever swinging dick in here. Put a wig on him. Let him play. There's one in France right now that is ready for the call to come play in the WNBA.
You can't be a male, born a male, transitioning to female, and think that you should have the right to compete with women. Not in basketball, not in football, not in boxing, not in the UFC. Hell, not even in tennis.
Now this is where the language gets heated, and not everybody is going to like how it is said. But strip away the delivery, and the argument is about contact sports, physical advantage, and whether women's leagues exist as protected categories for a reason. Stephen A. brings up basketball, boxing, UFC, and tennis because he is trying to make the point that this is not just symbolic. In sports, bodies matter, size matters, strength matters, speed matters, explosion matters. And the entire reason women's sports exist separately is because biological differences affect competition. That is the argument his side is making. And it is also why Cheryl Reeve's shirt became so loaded. Because when a coach in a women's professional league appears to side against that concern, critics see it as women's sports leadership abandoning the very category it is paid to protect. Now, supporters of Reeve would probably say the shirt said trans kids belong, not rewrite every eligibility rule tomorrow. That is the counter-argument. They would say Stephen A. is reading too much into the shirt and tying it to a broader policy debate that the shirt itself does not spell out. But the timing is what destroys that defense for a lot of people. She wore it after Sophie Cunningham's comments became the story. She wore it during the Fever game. She wore it when the cameras were guaranteed to be there. That is why it was never going to be read as just a shirt.
We gotta stop acting like somebody that's speaking up on behalf of girls, like a Sophie Cunningham, like a Riley Gaines, are scourges of the earth. You are Cheryl Reeve, the head coach of the Minnesota Lynx. That is an irresponsible thing to do. You are a coach for a female basketball team. Do you not think that the females are being screwed over if they have to compete against a individual born as a male?
Got to be more careful.
There it is. He says Cheryl Reeve is the head coach of a female basketball team, and then asks the question that puts her on the defensive. Do you not think female athletes are being put at a disadvantage if they have to compete against somebody born male? That is the core accusation. Not that Reeve cares about trans kids. The accusation is that she is prioritizing one cause while ignoring the athletes in the league she actually represents. And that is why Sophie Cunningham has become such a lightning rod. She is not the biggest star in the league. She is not Caitlin Clark. She is not Aja Wilson. She is not the face of the WNBA. But because she spoke plainly on a subject that a lot of athletes avoid, she became bigger than her box score. That makes every reaction to her important. Booing her becomes part of the story. Defending her becomes part of the story. Wearing a shirt that appears to push back on her becomes part of the story. And the WNBA should have seen this coming. When a player becomes nationally known for taking a controversial stance, every arena she enters becomes a referendum. Every coach comment becomes evidence. Every league response becomes a signal. Reeve stepped into that signal war voluntarily.
What are you talking about? You trying to tell me that a college player for the men's at a college program anywhere in the country or an NBA player should transition to being a woman and be allowed to compete in the WNBA? Or on a collegiate level to a women's college program?
That is what some of them are saying. Yes.
Whether it's UConn, South Carolina, Iowa, Tennessee, or wherever else you want to come up with. What the hell are you talking about? It's not true. It is false. AJ DeBonza, not to throw his name out there, Darren Peterson, hell, pick a scrub. If you're a male and transitioning to female, you should be playing against the women. Nobody said you can't transition from male to female. The issue here is competing against the women. That's what Sophie Cunningham was talking about. That's what Riley Gaines is talking about.
This is where Stephen A. goes from principle to practical reality. He brings up college basketball, the WNBA, and the idea of male athletes transitioning and then competing against women. His point is not subtle. If people accept the principle, then they have to accept where it could lead. And this is the argument that scares a lot of fans. They are not only thinking about one hypothetical athlete, they are thinking about the precedent. They are thinking about the next player, the next roster spot, the next scholarship, the next locker room, the next championship. That is why the issue does not stay small, because even if the number of cases is limited right now, the question is about rules, and once rules change, the entire category can change. For the WNBA, that is especially sensitive because it is finally experiencing a wave of attention that it spent decades trying to earn. Caitlin Clark brought massive new eyeballs. Sophie Cunningham brought a different kind of attention with her comments and her style. The Fever became the traveling circus every arena wanted to host. So the league has two choices. It can become a sports league that keeps the product at the center, or it can keep allowing political and cultural fights to sit right beside the product. And Stephen A. is arguing that Cheryl Reeve made the second choice.
And then you're going to come out with a t-shirt. No regard for the WNBA. No regard for the sponsors that may be put off by that. No regard for the bottom line that might be affected because of a position that she has taken that you know is.
That's a great point. You don't give a shit about the business. You put your belief set front and center. WNBA just now getting traction. Boy, they are trying everything they can to lose the traction that they have gained from Caitlin Clark's popularity, now Sophie Cunningham's popularity.
Going to be politicized because that's what you did.
This is the pivot. This is where the rant stops being only about fairness and starts being about money. Stephen A. says Reeve showed no regard for the WNBA, no regard for sponsors, no regard for the bottom line, and no regard for the fact that the league is finally getting traction. That is the real knife twist. Because for years, the WNBA has wanted more attention, more coverage, more respect, more investment, more television relevance, more merchandise movement, more people in seats. And now that the attention is finally there, some of the league's own figures keep dragging the conversation away from basketball. That is what frustrates critics. They look at the current moment and say this is the biggest opportunity the league has ever had. Caitlin Clark turned random regular season games into appointment viewing. The Fever became a road draw. Rivalries started feeling real. People who never cared about the WNBA were suddenly debating rotations, referees, ratings, injuries, and playoff seeding. That is the dream. That is what the league needed. But instead of fully protecting that momentum, the WNBA keeps finding ways to make new viewers ask whether they actually want to be part of this culture. And that is where Reeve's shirt becomes bigger than Reeve. It becomes a symbol for what a lot of critics believe has held the league back. The inability to separate the game from activism long enough to let the product breathe.
How? Because your spirit and your soul told you that's the right thing to do. So bump how it affects the collective brand of the WNBA and how they may be frowned upon by half of America when you need all the support that you can get in building your product is exceptional as the league and these young ladies playing in the league have done in building the sport all of these years. And you just gonna come out there and wear that shirt, knowing it was going to bring attention to you and knowing that you're going up against the Indiana Fever with Caitlin Clark, who obviously is the number one draw in the WNBA, which means cameras are rolling. It's just an accident.
That is the business argument in its sharpest form. Stephen A. is not saying Reeve does not have the right to believe what she believes. He is saying she put her personal statement before the collective brand. And that is a brutal accusation in a league where everybody is asking for more. More salary, better charter flights, bigger media deals, better facilities, more respect from fans who ignored them for years. You cannot demand mainstream support and then act shocked when mainstream audiences have mainstream objections. That is the contradiction Stephen A. is pointing at. The WNBA wants America's attention, but once America looks over, some of the league's most visible figures seem almost eager to test how much of that audience they can alienate before they leave. And the Fever connection makes it even more obvious. Reeve did not wear that shirt during some invisible matchup. She wore it against the team that carries the brightest spotlight in the league. She knew the cameras would be there. She knew Caitlin Clark brings viewers. She knew Sophie Cunningham had already become part of the controversy. So the defense that this was just a quiet personal statement does not really work. Quiet personal statements are not worn in front of the biggest audience available. That does not mean Reeve should be banned from having an opinion. It means people are allowed to judge the judgment.
This is the bullshit. It's the selfishness. It's putting yourself before the betterment of the whole. And it's creating a case that doesn't exist. To the trans athletes out there, people are not against you like some people may lead you to believe. There's a lot of people that are empathetic and sympathetic to the challenges that you face and are God-fearing individuals who wish you no harm and want you to live your best life and want you to do whatever you feel is right for you.
This is the part where Stephen A. tries to close the moral loop. He says people are not against trans athletes as people. He says many people are sympathetic, empathetic, and want them to live their lives. But he says that support cannot come at the expense of girls and women. That distinction is exactly what the WNBA has failed to communicate clearly. The league can say it supports inclusion, it can say it opposes harassment, it can say it wants every person treated with dignity. But it also has to answer the sports question. What is the rule? What is the standard? What protects the women's category? What does the league believe? Because if the league never says that clearly, every player, coach, and media figure fills the vacuum. Sophie Cunningham fills it one way, Cheryl Reeve fills it another, Stephen A. fills it another, fans fill it with anger. Activists fill it with slogans, commentators fill it with clips, and the league ends up looking like it is being dragged behind its own controversy. That is bad leadership. Not because every hard topic has an easy answer, but because a league trying to build trust cannot let the answer change depending on who grabs the microphone.
Into women having a sport for their own that's infiltrated by others who are not born the way that they were. There are girls who are evolving into women who know who they are, and what they want to be as women. If you were born a male and you're transitioning into female, you are different. That difference does not give anybody the right to violate your civil rights and your civil liberties, or to do harm for you, or to excoriate you, or to mess with you, or to torture you, or anything like that, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. They don't have a right to do that. But you don't have the right to impede upon women's sports when you were not born a woman or a girl.
Now the argument becomes very direct. Stephen A. says girls grow into women with a sport of their own, and that category should not be overtaken by people who were not born into it. Again, this is the point that turns the temperature up, because to one side, that sounds like basic fairness. To the other side, it sounds exclusionary. And the WNBA is caught in the middle because it is not some abstract debate club, it is a women's sports league. That means every position it takes, or appears to take, reflects back on the athletes who have built their lives inside that category. This is why Reeve's role matters. She is not just a fan in the stands. She is not just a random social media account. She is a championship coach, a major figure in the league, and one of the most visible leaders in women's basketball. So when she wears a message that enters this debate, it carries institutional weight even if she says it is personal. People do not separate Cheryl Reeve the citizen from Cheryl Reeve the Lynx coach when she is on the sideline during a WNBA game. That is what Stephen A. is hammering. The shirt was not worn in private. It was worn at work, on camera, during a game attached to the league's biggest draw. And if the WNBA thinks that distinction does not matter, then it does not understand why people are reacting so strongly.
Obviously extremely liberal in that regard, which is her right, and there's no problem with that. The WNBA, however, did they know you were going to do that before you did that? Was that a coincidence that you wore it the night that you were playing the Indiana Fever, knowing that everybody watches wherever Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever go? Did you think about the collective challenge it would bring to the brand? Or the brand and the challenge it would bring to it collectively? Did you think about that? No, you didn't.
That is the question the league cannot dodge. Did anyone think about the brand before that shirt hit the sideline? Because this is not only about Cheryl Reeve's opinion, it is about whether the WNBA has any control over its own growth moment, and the answer, lately, does not look great. The Fever Games are bringing in attention that the league has never consistently had before. Caitlin Clark is the #1 draw. Sophie Cunningham has become a national talking point. Every Fever matchup has extra cameras, extra headlines, extra social clips, and extra people watching who might be converted into actual fans. That is precious, that is not guaranteed, that can disappear. And this is the danger for the WNBA. New viewers do not have decades of loyalty. They do not have an emotional attachment to the league. They are sampling the product. They are deciding whether this is worth their time. If the first thing they see is a league constantly fighting culture wars instead of showcasing basketball, they can leave as quickly as they arrived. That is the payoff Stephen A. is building toward. He is saying the league may finally have the audience it begged for, and some of its own leaders are giving that audience reasons to walk away.
Stephen A. Smith is absolutely right. That's the one part of all this that nobody's brought up, is the fact that you still have a league that 110%, we still do not have confirmation if it's ever turned a profit. We suspected they might last year, maybe. There were some indications, but nobody really knows. But for 29 years, the league never turned a profit. Maybe for 30 years. You're getting an audience and you're stretching into audiences that have not watched before. And some of them have not watched because they've heard, well, hell, these women are crazy. That's a political league. It's an activist league. And do I really want to support that? Do I really want to watch that? And you actually got 2 players now that people are tuning in, peeking in, and saying, I want to see what they're up to. I want to see what they're doing. Well, your league doesn't survive if you don't keep the people peeking in.
And this is where the original host jumps in and says Stephen A. is right, especially on the business side. The league has spent nearly 3 decades fighting for profitability, fighting for mainstream credibility, and fighting to prove it deserves more than niche attention. So when the WNBA finally starts stretching into new audiences, the worst possible move is to immediately remind those audiences why they stayed away. That is the argument. Not everyone avoided the WNBA because the basketball was bad. Some avoided it because they believed the league was too political, too activist, too hostile to ordinary sports fans who just wanted to watch a game. Maybe that reputation is fair, maybe it is exaggerated, but it exists. And when a coach uses the highest profile stage available to make a divisive statement, it reinforces that reputation for the very people the league needs to win over. That is why this moment matters more than one shirt. It fits a pattern critics already believe. They believe the WNBA gets momentum and then undercuts itself. They believe the league asks for support, but often acts annoyed by the people giving it. They believe players and coaches want the money that comes with mass appeal, without accepting the restraint that mass appeal sometimes requires. That is a hard bargain. But it is a real one. If the league wants to be bigger, it has to understand that bigger audiences come with more scrutiny.
And just to see Sophie Cunningham, because she's made the national news. Cheryl Reeve wore that shirt. Well, I wanted to give this league a chance, but look at the shit she's got on. Circus clown. I don't want to watch that. I don't want to sit here with my girls or my boys. I don't want them seeing that shirt. I'm not going to give them my viewership. I'm not going to buy their products if this is the kind of shit they're supporting. I'm not doing that.
That reaction is exactly what the WNBA should be afraid of. Not outrage from people who were never going to watch. Not political accounts farming clicks. The real danger is the casual viewer who says, I was going to give this league a chance, but I am out. That is the audience the league cannot afford to lose, because the WNBA's growth is not just about the diehards. The diehards were already there. The growth is in the curious fan, the Caitlin Clark fan, the parent watching with their daughter, the sports fan who saw a highlight and decided to check out a game, the person who never cared before but suddenly knew the Fever's schedule. Those people are not locked in, they can still be lost. And every time the product turns into a referendum on politics, some of them decide they have other things to watch. That is not a threat. That is just how entertainment works. People have endless options. They do not have to fight with a league to become fans of it. So when Stephen A. Says Reeve did not think about the bottom line. This is what he means. The bottom line is not only sponsors and dollars, it is trust, it is comfort, it is whether a new viewer feels like the league is inviting them in or daring them to leave.
You're trying to build, you said, nah, I think this cause is more important. And hence, Cheryl Reeve, people like Breonna Turner, these people are the reason why this league has never done anything. And if they get a chance to do something, they don't know how to not blow it. It's wild. Not only do they not care about blowing, but they'll get smart ass about blowing it. Like, you're the one with the problem. No, nobody watches you, so you're kind of the one with the problem. I wasn't watching. I can go about my day, back to not watching. And again, the neurons aren't firing to tell them you only got the CBA money because of the new eyeballs coming in, but you want to push them back out the door.
That closing point is harsh, but it lands because it goes straight at the WNBA's biggest contradiction. The league wants the benefits of new attention, but some of its loudest voices seem almost allergic to the audience that attention brings. And that is the real story here. Stephen A. Smith did not just criticize Cheryl Reeve for wearing a shirt, he accused her of failing the business test at the exact moment the WNBA can least afford it. The league is not in a normal season, it is in a growth window. The Caitlin Clark effect has opened doors. The Fever have become the most watched traveling show in the sport. Sophie Cunningham has brought a completely different group of people into the conversation. More people are watching, arguing, reacting and buying in than before. That should be the moment where the WNBA gets disciplined. Sell the basketball. Build the stars, protect the rivalries, keep the games dramatic, let the product lead. Instead, the league keeps getting pulled into fights that make new viewers wonder whether the basketball is even the main event. And Cheryl Reeve's shirt became the perfect flashpoint because it forced everyone to answer a bigger question. Is the WNBA serious about becoming a mainstream sports league, or is it still comfortable being a niche activist brand with basketball attached? That is the choice, because Stephen A. can support the right of adults to live how they choose and still say women's sports need boundaries. Sophie Cunningham can say she wants to protect girls and still say she is not preaching hate. Fans can support dignity for everyone and still ask why a women's league seems so unwilling to defend the women's category clearly. Those positions are not automatically hateful. They are part of the debate the WNBA keeps trying to survive without actually leading. So now the league has a decision to make. It can let every coach, player, and television rant define the issue for them, or it can finally speak clearly enough that the product stops getting hijacked every time the Fever walk into another arena. Because right now, the controversy is doing what controversies always do. It is bigger than the game, louder than the box score, and more viral than the highlights. So where do you land on this? Was Cheryl Reeve just standing up for what she believes, or did she use the WNBA's biggest spotlight to damage the league's own momentum? Drop your answer in the comments, hit like and subscribe for more no-filter breakdowns on the stories the sports media does not want to touch.